Hey, early birds. Mr. Moo, Wick Works. I'm gonna get started in just a minute. If either of you, anyone who knows me personally, wants me to use their real name instead of their handle, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm gonna default to using the handle. Hi, Olive. Good to see you. Or, like, I guess, be connected. Brian! Oh my goodness, hi! Hi, Miranda. Dope. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and get started a whole entire minute early. How's the audio level? I have some music playing in the background. Is it too loud, too soft? Okay, dope. Hi, everyone. So I'm in the middle of doing some prep work, which I probably should have done earlier today, because the idea is to paint as much as I can in the next 2 hours. And for all the tests I have done, 2 hours is not really enough to get a portrait finished. So set your expectations accordingly, please. My face says yay to you also, Mr. Moo. Hi! Bearded Blueser, I was just saying earlier, and maybe I should, I wonder if I can, pin a chat message or something. Let me know if you want me to use your IRL real person name. Otherwise, I'll just default to using your chat name, because I know some people don't want to be, I don't know, is it called doxing if it's your chat name? But just let me know. Okay, so here's what's going on. This is my sketch, and we're gonna do another one of Ellie, because I like The Last of Us, and it's nice to work with a public figure who you don't have to ask permission of before you start doing a stream of their face. Thanks, Bella Ramsey. So what I'm doing is I'm putting some Frisket on the paper. It's always my first step. It's probably gonna be kind of hard to see what's actually going on there. You can see how it's glistening a little bit. Frisket is this, really gross-smelling rubbery stuff. Art masking fluid. Like so. There we go. That will actually protect the paper, or in this case, actually get all over your paper because you didn't close it tightly enough. But it's this is a great example. So it dries this, kind of weird latex texture, and it sits over the paper. It sits over the paper, and it protects it from the color and the paint that's going down on top of it. So when I'm done with everything, I can scrape it off and I'll have these little bits of white underneath. Because the only way to paint white with watercolor is to not paint at all. Alternatively, just get Frisket all over yourself. Anyway, it smells really bad. It's kind of like rubbery. Okay, I'm checking in with the chat. And please, anytime, just let me know if the audio gets weird. I don't have a lot of experience doing Twitch streaming, so yeah. Just let me know if something gets off. Okay, so the nice thing about Frisket is it's really easy to clean up once it dries. I'm also glad, Mr. Moo, that it is not brisket. Once it dries, it can just be rubbed off, kind of like an eraser. Okay. We're working off of a playlist of free music that I put together today because I realized after my last test stream that Twitch and also music creators really don't like it when you play copyright music on your streams and then take videos of it. And what will happen is they will take your video down. So now I'm trying some free stuff. We'll just see how that goes. Okay. Back to it. I'm going to do my best to explain what it is that I'm doing while I'm painting. I am absolutely going to just completely drop a sentence right off the map. The unofficial drinking game is you have to take a drink whenever I do that, or miss a word, but you certainly don't have to. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because I'm doing a live demo in May, and I'm going to have to be able to paint and talk at the same time, and I'm not very good at that right now. Okay, so there's the last couple pieces of little bits of frisket going on. This stuff is kind of a pain to work with. You have to kind of put it down as a bubble and then push it around. I'm using this rubber-tipped brush. Not even a brush. What happens if you put like a hairbrush in it is it just ruins your paintbrush. So instead I use this thing that's got like a rubbery tip on it. So I'm picking out any areas in my reference photo, which you should be able to see in the upper left, that I want to stay white. It doesn't necessarily mean that those areas are white in the photograph. It just means that I want the painting to stay white there, which we'll call an artistic license. Okay. Frisket is pretty imprecise, so I also tend to clean it up a little bit at the end, and we'll just see if we get that far tonight. Yeah, Mr. Moo, if you want to send me music to, like, as long as it's like something that can like work in the background, I'm in. All right. Yeah, Miranda, you're excused from the drinking game if you're on the East Coast. Yes, Goat Screaming Volume 2, that will absolutely do it. Okay. So, gotta wait for the little bits of frisket to dry. If you just came in, the explanation that you missed was that we're putting little bits of bad-smelling rubber on the paper to prevent it from getting painted on. At the very end, I'll take off the little bits of bad-smelling rubber, and there'll be white spots on the paper. And you might not be able to see it here so well in the video, but like that's right here in the eye where there's a highlight, a little bit up here along the top of her forehead, around the nose, stuff like that. And as soon as that is dry, I'm going to put my first layer down. So let's mix some colors. I'm gonna shift this a little bit while you guys can look at my super messy palette. Our photo is actually yanked from a screenshot, so hopefully HBO or whatever doesn't come after me. And it's the scene, I don't know who's seen this, but the scene was very, very warm. It was like kind of orange light, and I didn't want to paint her that orange, so I did some digital tweaking to adjust the color balance. And it's still pretty warm, but we got some cooler yellows and like almost yellow green up near the top of her forehead. So the very first thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to focus mostly on painting her skin. If I get to the clothing in the background, that's going to be great, but probably not. So what I'm looking at is a base layer all the way from I'm gesticulating my screen like you guys can see this, but all the way from the forehead down to her neck is a smooth gradient, basically, where it's light yellowish green kind of at the top, and it comes down to like a pretty warm orangey tone. So what I want to do is mix two colors that fit the bill for that, and then also a little bit of this kind of pinkish color that I'm seeing. So let's do that. Probably should have cleaned out my palette beforehand, but yeah, what's the fun in that? Alrighty. The first yellow, I'm gonna pick up some of what I already got down here. This is a very neutral, very bright, what is this? I think this is cadmium yellow. No, Hansa yellow. And a very small amount of quinacridone gold, which has a really warm profile to it. I'm gonna need more than this. And I'm gonna tint this, let's see. I'm gonna mix another batch of this. Same idea, but I'm gonna tint it just a little bit green. And then we'll get some orange going. There's dust all over my palette because I store my paint supplies on the floor. Don't take tips from me. Actually, this is good. So the colors I have on here are probably burnt sienna over here, a little bit of ochre yellow. I try to kind of leave my blobs of paint in convenient areas, sort of in color families, so I can just kind of end up muddling them together. Okay, we're gonna warm this up with something I don't have. This is quinacridone red, which is this very kind of pinkish texture to it. Texture, that's what we call color, isn't it? Okay. Some of that in here. I'm sort of just trying to color match what's going on at the bottom of her neck. And we'll adjust as I put it on the paper, because everything always looks different on the paper than it does in the palette. Alrighty, frisket is dry, hopefully. The first thing I do, generally, when I'm trying to apply a wash or like a big smooth gradient, is I get everything quite wet. With watercolor, you can work with everything very wet, or you can work on top of something that's already dry, but when you start working on top of a damp area, or your area starts to dry while you're painting on it, you get weird shit. I think that's the technical term. So, weird shit can be really good in watercolor. Weird shit is like, you can make a whole area be very, very textured and have a lot of character to it by using these like kind of chaotic weird shit elements. But when I'm painting skin, I don't usually want weird shit. I don't want chaotic elements. I want controlled gradients. So in this case, we are trying to avoid the weird shit. So I'm just putting down pure water here, and I'm picking out really everywhere that I'm gonna see skin tones. Her ear. I'll be painting the hair over this. You can paint dark over light in watercolor. You cannot paint light over dark. So don't fuck up. You know, it's funny, like, dermatology and skin conditions came up in my last stream, so maybe, maybe there's something there. A little concerning. Okay, so now that I've got this whole area pretty comfortably damp, I'm gonna start putting color down. And you'll see pretty quickly that it will diffuse out. It's a good point, Athena. I'm not sure. Another thing about watercolor is that if you put it down and it looks like it's about the right color, it is definitely not the right color. It is way too light. Watercolor will lighten considerably as it dries, and you just have to account for that. So I'd look at this and I'd be like, oh yeah, that looks like about the right shade. That means I have to add more paint. Sometimes I get the right depth by adding lots of layers. I don't really have time for lots of layers tonight, so I'm hoping to just get it right the first time. Like every time. Okay. And the other thing I want to do here is make sure I add in a little bit of green. Which sounds kind of weird when you think about skin, but most lighter shades of skin especially have green or blue lighting, kind of undercoloration, because skin is both transparent and reflective, and the darker the skin, the more light is reflected, and the paler the skin, the more light is transluced. I'm gonna pick that up. So with someone with pretty light skin, you tend to see some of the underlying structures, like kind of a bluish green tone. So I'm making sure a little bit of that greenish blue is gonna go into her skin, because it's gonna add a lot of interesting depth that I might not notice right away. I've got to stop keeping my paints on the floor. There's lint all over it. I'm a professional. You might not notice right away just by looking at it. But like, if you start looking at skin a whole lot, you'll notice that there's purples, there's blues, there's greens, all kinds of, again, weird shit. Although this is weird shit that's supposed to be in your skin, I think. Okay. Let's do green. Great. Alright. And the fun part about this is I have to work fast enough that my working area does not dry, otherwise I'm gonna get aforementioned weird shit. And once that starts to happen, I'll demonstrate what that looks like, because I'm sure it will. Okay, a little bit of green. Feel free to ask questions if you have them. I'll do my best to keep an eye on chat and answer stuff as it comes up, or just make up answers. Happy to do that too. I may get sucked into this, but I am trying to train my brain to be able to handle more things at a time. So far, so good. Miranda, do not tell them this is witchcraft or I will be burned as a witch. It really sucked last time that happened. Alright, so I think I got my lighter shades working for me, and now what I have to do is get these darker shades in here really aggressively before things start to dry. as I add diluted pigment to this, you'll see that where I have like kind of a watery area, if I add diluted pigment to it, the water really kind of starts to go crazy and it starts to push pigment around, and I end up with uncontrolled effects. So as I go into to drop pigment into this more this wet working area, I have to drop in quite concentrated pigment, and then it will dilute out. But that means I can't just mix a color and put the color down like you might with acrylic or something. It means I have to kind of guess based on whatever pigment I am working with at the moment, guess what it's going to do when I put it on the wet piece of paper. So I spend so much of my time just guessing what pigment's going to do when I put it on the wet piece of paper. It's a lifestyle. Mr. Moo, the upcoming paste eating episode is going to be subscribers only. I charge a premium for that. The paper I'm using is Winsor Newton, and I like it. It's professional grade watercolor paper. It doesn't buckle too much. It's 100% cotton. Got good texture to it. The other paper I use is Arches, and it has a lot more texture to it, and sometimes you want all that texture, and sometimes you just don't want to have to fight with the paper that much. Okay, so I'm trying to match the shade at the bottom of her neck right now, and I'm noticing that it's getting kind of purplish. I have to bring in some cooler tones. The other thing I'm noticing is that the top part of my working area is starting to dry out, so I'm going to mist it so that it will have a little bit more time before weird shit starts happening. Okay, what am I doing? I'm making a purple. This is Payne's Gray, which is kind of it's gray, but it's really kind of a dark blue. And it's one of my very favorite dark shades. You can add it to just about anything and it will it'll chill it out and it will darken it. I do not use black paint, so I tend to use Payne's Gray in place of that. Yeah, Mr. Moo, I'm using watercolor, not gouache. The difference is that gouache is... No one asked this, but you're getting it anyway. Gouache is not transparent, it is opaque, or it is slightly opaque. And watercolor is generally completely transparent. The thing is, these rules start to break down once you have been painting, or once enough edge cases come into play. Gouache can be used both translucent, as if it's thinned down, it will be translucent, and if it is left concentrated, it will be opaque, so you can paint light on top of dark. But in this case, I'm doing lots of layers of transparent pigment. And generally the difference here is pigment size. Transparent pigments tend to be smaller pigment size, and opaque tend to be larger, and it just really has to do with how the light is hitting it. Okay, I'm pushing a little bit of this red into her cheek. And at this stage, there's a lot of decision making about, like, what am I trying to handle on this layer? And what am I gonna leave for a layer, the next layer? And in this case, I don't want to go too hard too soon, because this layer has really no detail in it. Everything, like, Olive, you pointed out that you said, I love the bloom of colors when they mix. It's like a small sunset. And that's what it does at this stage. When you work really wet like this, it goes all over the place, and everything blooms and softens and disperses into everything else. Okay, I'm going to... What I would usually do at this stage is I would add a bit of pink to the tip of her nose, but what's happened is that her nose is too dry for that right now. I need to moisturize it. So I'm gonna let it dry completely. Again, you can work wet on wet, and you can work wet on dry, but do not work on damp unless you want stuff to happen. Okay. If you see my eyes crossing, it is because I'm literally crossing my eyes to look at my reference photo. It's an artistic technique. I'm blotting a little bit from the top of her cheekbone. I think I'm gonna need to go in later with a little bit more pink there, but I just want to make sure I don't get it too dark. Yeah, exactly, Brian. It's an advanced technique of just staring at it till your eyes cross. Okay, so while this dries, I'm gonna do a little bit of fussing, and I'm gonna pick up a little bit of pigment that went somewhere that it wasn't really supposed to go. The general rule of watercolor is once you put something down, that's it. You've done it, and you have to live with your choices. There's no changing that. But the actual answer is that once something has dried a bit, sometimes you can pick up a little bit of that pigment with like a stiff, damp brush. I use this technique all the time because I frequently put paint where I don't want it to go. Okay, I'm taking a little bit off the tip of her ear because I think I got that a bit too dark. And we're gonna let this dry. You're gonna be surprised, I think, by the time it dries completely because it's gonna be much, much lighter. Or maybe you won't be, I don't know. It always surprises me. Taking a little bit here. Okay. And while this dries, I'm going to work on an area that does not touch this. So I'm gonna work on this shoulder here, I think. Ooh, maybe. I might actually put a background in. So right now I can work anywhere. If I were to put my brush down here with paint on it, you guys see this? Yeah, like a wet area right here. It would start flowing. These pigments would start flowing out, and whatever paint I put down would start flowing in, and it would just become a clusterfuck immediately. So I have to keep like a teeny little bit of dry paper or work next to an area of dried pigment until this becomes dry. So that means I pretty much can put down a background. So we're gonna do that. I'm gonna like kind of go based off of, I'm gonna go off of what we have in the picture, and then I'm gonna tweak it a little bit. Yes, Miranda, fussing is the technical term. So, let's see, what are we gonna do for the background? The figure's warm. It's very warm at the bottom. We have a lot of red, orange tones, and I want something kind of contrasting. I think the harsh, like the pale, bright blue tones in the light, the highlight behind her, I think are really interesting, so I'm gonna work off of that. And very much like what I did earlier, where I put the water down first, that is exactly what I'm gonna do here. So I'm gonna put the water down, this is like invisible painting, very carefully, everywhere that I want paint to go. Let me do this on my other hand so you guys can see. And not at all where I don't want the paint to go. I'm gonna allow it to go over her hair because her hair is very dark and I can paint over that. And I don't want to leave a hard line. So I'm not caring too much about where the water is over here by the end of the ponytail, but I am being very cautious, oops, to keep things neat. Right around here. And this step can be difficult because water is invisible. And you kind of have to, like, I have to turn my head to the side a little bit and sort of, well, squint to look at the reflection to see where I've actually put water down. One way to do this is to have a little bit of pigment in your water already, but that would be too easy, and I like to suffer. This is a big brush, but I have a lot of control if I just use the edge of it. Famous last words. And once I have laid down a pathway for the water, I can kind of just plop a little bit more water nearby where it needs to go, and then it will diffuse along the path that I set. So in one sense, watercolor is kind of about creating pathways. It's about making little roads that pigment can go to with your water, and it won't go anywhere that you don't put water. Like, pigment won't flow onto dry paper unless there's a lot of water. It has to go where the water goes. So you direct your pigment by directing the water. All right, we're gonna use, let's see, I already have some colors on this other palette, and I'm gonna add a little bit more. Probably, let's see, the blues I like to use are Payne's Gray, that we've already talked about, and Ultramarine Blue, which is this it's a very blue. I don't really know how else to describe it. I'm sure there's technical terms for it, but it's just extremely blue. And then I'm also going to put down Phthalocyanin Blue, which took me a really long time to learn how to say, which doesn't look very blue. In fact, it looks quite teal. But it turns out it's a very neutral blue. It's a very pure blue. It's a blue that I use for mixing a lot of the time. If I mix the blue that looks really blue, the ultramarine, things get muddy. Maybe we'll have an example or have an opportunity to do that later. Okay, so I'm gonna grab a slightly smaller brush. I'm gonna grab this brush. This is a squirrel hair brush. I don't know why they do that to squirrels, but it does carry a lot of water, so sorry, squirrels. Okay, so that's our Phthalocyanin Blue, which is extremely blue. Or it's a very, like, teal shade. And I'm gonna start off by accidentally dropping some of that directly on the face of my subject. I'm gonna start off by just really plopping pigment in here. And a little bit over here. And I'm trying to think about gradients and flow and shape as I build this up. Here's our ultramarine blue. You would agree, I hope, that that's in fact very blue. And I'm gonna go a little bit harder on the ultramarine over on this side, I think. Because the side of her face is light, I want to get some darker shades in here. So I'm going to pull a little bit of our Payne's Gray out, which really, it has lint stuck to it. I'm going to clean my palettes before I do this next time. And I'm dropping this very, very close to the edge. Get out of there. Go. But not quite there, and I'm just actually gonna kind of push it until it goes where I want it to go. And now I have a lot of shades of blue, so what I want to do is add something that is not blue, because a little bit of contrast adds a lot of pop. This is just a little bit of that quinacridone red that I'm pushing into the Payne's Gray, as well as down here, which is going to kind of neutralize a little bit of the blues as it hits it. While everything is wet, I don't really need to worry about creating like specific shapes, because it's not gonna look like that anyway. Everything is going to blur together, and I'm taking advantage of that to be extremely lazy. One of the things I like about watercolor is if you can make the chaotic effects work for you, you can be very lazy. Blotting some areas, because this is going to change as I control the water by removing it. This also controls where the pigment goes, and it will create interesting effects when it dries. I want to get this whole thing a little bit darker, so I'm adding more Payne's Gray. And here's the thing, is for this whole portrait, for everything that I paint, is going to look really weird until the end. It might still look weird at the end, but watercolor is kind of an exercise in just sort of holding on and hoping against hope that what you intended to happen is actually what does happen. Okay, so we have a lot of colors on here, and I'm seeing that it's going to be a little hard to see some of this because of the way the light is reflecting off of it. As that starts to dry off, it'll be a little bit easier to see what's actually going on here. As I build up this background, what I really want is I want some change. I want it to have a little bit of depth in it. And I want it to have character. So I like that I have lighter areas. I like that I have darker areas. I think I want even darker areas. And maybe a little bit more of an intense red area. And then I'm going to put some salt down, and then I'm going to stop messing with it. Go. Because this is going to become dry enough to work with very shortly, I think. It's dry enough to clean up. Okay, yes, great question, Miranda. Salt. What is salt for? Salt is a cheap and easy way to make cool effects with no effort whatsoever. I'll show you some examples of what salt bloom looks like. I've done it on a bunch of my portraits, but I sprinkle the salt, and as it dries, put a little bit down here, we get cool effects. Another thing that's gonna look totally weird until it's actually dry. I have an example of a recent portrait, the one I did on the last stream. Oh no. Here we go. Okay, so, let's see, can you see this? This is a portrait that had salt put on it. So I painted the background very similarly, just put water down, blotched some color on, let it diffuse out, and then I put salt on it, and it made these cool, kind of like flower-like, bloomy patterns. I love this because it adds texture, it adds depth, it adds some interest to it, and it takes no effort other than sprinkling the salt on it. So, I still have to wait a little bit for this to dry. I'm gonna clear up any of the little droplets that I got someplace I wasn't supposed to get. And check in with the chat because I've missed some stuff, I think. Thank you, Indigo. Yes, it is frustrating to work with. It is frustrating to learn to work with it, and it is frustrating to work with it, and I still think it's probably totally worth it. Except when I'm suffering. And then I have to ask myself questions about my life choices. It does seem really complicated. It's one of those, like, really idiosyncratic mediums. But, like, once you start to use it, once you start to get a sense of those particular idiosyncrasies, it does start to make a little bit more sense than one might think. Not like a lot more sense, but a little bit more sense. Hey, I was saying earlier, Amandra, that and I should just like pin a message or something. If you want me to use your real name, I will happily use your real name. I just wanted to ask beforehand, rather than I don't know if people care if their real names are associated with their handles. Anyway, Amandra, good to see you on the stream. Thank you for coming. Okay, what's next? We wait for this to dry. I said I was gonna stop fussing, but I am a dirty, dirty liar, and I'm gonna put a little bit, just a few dark spots in a few areas. And I'm actually gonna get a little bit more fresh pigment to do that with. Kind of like a little bit going for like sort of a Milky Way effect. Why? I don't really know. Seems like it would be cool. A thing that I've had to learn the hard way about watercolor, and I feel like I'm perpetually learning, is that it's very easy to do too much. I'm not a person that's good at doing too little. I like to do things and then keep doing them and then do them until they're absolutely ruined. And so I've had to really learn to like put something down and stop messing with it with watercolor. Maybe I'll learn how to do that in the rest of my life. Amanda is saying, have you tried any other kitchen seasoning to see if they make cool effects too? I have not, but you know what? I absolutely should. So I'll get some pepper next time, see what happens. I'm sure there's someone out there who's like painting with harissa. Like, I mean, turmeric is a really strong pigment. I don't think they'd be light safe, but you could definitely do some really interesting work with kitchen spices. Okay, I've deemed this hopefully dry enough to work on. Usually the way that I tell if something is dry enough, something can look dry, but if it's buckly, there's still a bit of moisture in it. And if you touch it and it's kind of cool, it means there's evaporating moisture in it. So I know that this is still damp, but I think it's dry enough for me. So I'm gonna put my next layer down. And that means getting some pink on the tip of her nose and building up the shadows around here and in her eye orbit. And then we'll go from there. We'll see what happens. I'm going to be using this brush a whole lot, my scroll brush. I want to say that no scrolls were harmed in the making of this, but I have no idea. I have not pulled the squirrels. I'm mixing a reddish shade, kind of reddish purple. I'm gonna give it a shot to work in some of the depth in her neck. More of that. while my first layer is a single smooth gradient, my next layer is also a bunch of single smooth gradients generally, but it's a whole bunch of different little shapes. So when I want to add a layer of color, if you've used watercolor, what you've probably noticed is that when you put wet watercolor down on dry paper, you get really hard edges. And it creates a very distinctive look. And I think there's nothing wrong with this. I think it can be very desirable in some cases. But when I'm painting skin, I usually want a really, really smooth overall effect. And so what I do is I control the edges, generally by blotting them. Sometimes, I can't put that in my mouth and talk at the same time. Turns out. Sometimes by taking a damp brush and softening the edge like that. That's not the edge I'm going to use, so I'm going to paint over that, but the same basic idea. So it's really just like lots of gradient shapes, and I've always, I've started to think about this second phase as like, I'm making a bunch of different shapes. I'm basically painting a bunch of weird looking slugs and then putting more pigment in them. Because painting, sketching and drawing are kind of about, they're about lines. You use lines to make things, to make representations. And painting is kind of about using shapes. And watercolor painting, even more than that, is about making shapes of gradients, if you ask me. Because one of the things that watercolor does, and that you get for free from watercolor, if you know how to do it, is you get the ability to make big, smooth, interesting, textured gradients without a whole lot of effort. Unfortunately, this is the same kind of, like, without effort that anything really difficult is. It's theoretically easy, but it takes a really long time to figure that out. So, I'm blotting the edge here. I'm trying to soften it a bit because I just don't want that to be a hard line. I'm gonna come back and fuss with it a little bit more after I change these gradients. I have made a video that I now, to my great shame, have a YouTube channel, and I do have a video that I had to make for an application, and I won't say that the video is super high quality, but it does go over the techniques that I use to create gradients and to create those gradient shapes for building up lifelike skin tones. So, if that's interesting to you and you want to watch something that's been filmed on a potato, go check it out. Oh. Well, I didn't get your note about the music, and now there's a different song, so let me know. I can put down pigment with the brush, as you have been watching me do. I can also pick up pigment with the brush if I wash it and blot it a little bit. If I decide that an area has just a little bit too much pigment. I'm reasonably happy with what's going on down here, but now I want to start moving up into the face a little bit. And this is a little tricky, because I don't want to pull whatever's going on down here up into there, but I also don't want this hard edge to form. So, That means it's fuss, 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 fuss. Okay. You just behave. Thank you. At this point, I'm probably going to have to do a second or a third layer on top of this area right here to get everything to agree. Because as I add more pigment, it's going to push other pigment around, and it's not going to look quite smooth and agreeable until I have plugged my computer in. It will not look quite smooth and agreeable until I have maybe got another layer over it. Give me a second. I should have plugged this in earlier. There we go. Seppo Kitsch. This is Winsor & Newton watercolor paper. It's a watercolor block, too, which means that if you don't know this already, you might. It's like a whole bunch of pieces of watercolor paper that are all stacked on top of each other and sealed along the edge. And it means that I don't have to tape, even though I've taped the edges to keep it clean, I don't have to tape the whole piece down to prevent it from buckling, which I find to be incredibly convenient. I can just rip the whole thing off the block and then I have a new piece underneath. Yes, thank you, Mr. Moo, you got it. Figure has a whole lot of pink going on in her face, so we're putting some pink in. And I'm blotting some of these edges to try to keep those hard edges out so I can keep that gradient, kind of smooth gradient look. And I am, at this moment, not too worried about the ear. I'm abstracting away the ear because I don't have time to think about it. And because the hair covers that area, it means that I have some, a little bit of flexibility to, get it wrong first. What I'm painting right now is not the hair itself, but the shadow that's underneath the hair. As well as up along her hairline. There's a lot of shadows and faces that, it's hard to see the difference in value. You look at a face and you say, it's all the same color, which sort of, sometimes. But the eye really likes to simplify things and starts to pull out information that it thinks is irrelevant. I guess I should blame the brain on this one. Brain. Oh my god, English. Blame the brain. Blame the brain? If you're playing the drinking game, take a drink. Anyway, what was I saying? So when you look at something, your brain starts to abstract away a lot of that information. And so learning how to paint stuff is a kind of a matter of trying to teach yourself how to look at the information that your brain is trying to make you not look at. Really, it's kind of a pain in the ass. Okay. Thank you, Sepikitch. So I'm gonna add a little bit of color in around the eyes now. And I start by putting down a big blob of color first. I try to get things mostly where they're supposed to be and not where they're not supposed to be, which is really the dream in life, when you think about it. Oh god, it's definitely where it's not supposed to be. And then once I have it down, I start to fix the edges. So in this case, while it's wet, while I have this big working puddle going on, I'm gonna add a little bit more warmth. I'm gonna have to work fast here because as it starts to dry, I start to lose options. I want to be clear that there is nothing wrong with having lots of hard edges in your watercolor. I think there's some like very, very cool styles and portrait styles too, where there's lots of overlapping hard edges. Like a portrait doesn't have to be photorealistic to be a good portrait, and even to be a very recognizable portrait. In fact, I'm most impressed with portraits that are not photorealistic but somehow capture the expression of the subject very well. But it's just the particular style that I like and that I have been pursuing is to have really controlled gradiating edges. Okay. So I'm going to go at this poor girl's nose because it needs to be pink. You'll probably notice that I haven't put a lot of colors out. In fact, I've only taken color out of a tube, twice, I think? Some of that's because I already have the colors that I'm working with on my palettes, but some of it is also because I'm trying to intentionally work with a limited palette. There's something about having not too many colors involved that really, I think, helps to keep a portrait cohesive, or any painting at all, really. To help keep things cohesive and kind of in agreement. as areas start to dry, because pigment frequently goes where I don't particularly want it to go, it's a little bit like herding cats. I just kind of hang out and I prod at things. If my pigment flood, if my pigment pond, whatever you want to call it, is starting to move somewhere where I don't want it to be, I just have to keep an eye on it. So it tends to be why I try to work on areas that are close to each other, so I don't work over here and then work over here and then find out later that the nose red has just escaped out onto the cheek. Because that happens sometimes. We are nearly at the end of hour 1. So far, so good, I think. Oops. Oops! I have some hope for making measurable progress on this. If I can stop painting over the teeth, that would be really nice. If I make a mistake and I put water down somewhere or pigment down somewhere where I don't want it to be, I have to leave that particular spot alone, let it dry, and then come back. With a really small area, luckily it doesn't take long for it to dry. I had someone once ask me for a tip on how to paint teeth that, and I quote here, don't look cursed. The only useful thing I can say is teeth are never white, and don't paint the spaces in between them. It just gets weird. I think Miranda is right on this one. She says teeth are bones trying to escape. I would say they're all cursed. You're not wrong about it. There are special cursed luxury bones that we have to pay extra for insurance on. Definitely cursed. Oh, Olive. Yeah, absolutely. The x-rays of like children teeth when they're all shoved up into the bone, the face bones, it's absolutely terrible. It's the worst. Alright. So I'm trying, this is theme of the night, not to fuss with this too much, but I have made the inside of the mouth and the top lip area, I'm sort of working, that's my current working wet area, and I'm blotting in a little bit of dark color to let it diffuse in and create a gentle gradient instead of having to go to all of that trouble of painting each individual structure. And then I'm leaving it alone. And I would like to point out here how the nose pigment is escaping into the lip again. The pigment cats, I think we're calling them now. Yes, Miranda, the teeth are, they are not part of my working wet area. They are specifically left dry so that I won't, yeah, so that the pigment cats will not escape into them. And pretty much every time I'm putting, this is why I was talking about slugs earlier. I swear I was going somewhere with that. But every time I'm putting something down at this stage, I'm trying to make a shape and not a line, and I'm trying to make a gradient, not a single color. So this underlid area is being described by kind of like a crescent shape, and it's also got this gradient to it. And because it has a gradient to it, which hopefully I will get the right color for, it gives it a lot more depth than a line would, and more depth than a single shade would. Now that the area just above this has dried a little bit, I can start to pick up some of those wayward spots of pigment that I didn't really want to be there. Okay. Let that dry. And I think I'm going to move back to the neck a bit and do that promised layer that's gonna hopefully bring everything a little bit more together. One of the easiest things to do in watercolor is to overwork an area. Trust me, I'm very good at it. As stuff starts to dry out, it becomes very easy to get kind of streaking, and as you start to push pigments around that have already settled into the paper. So frequently it's good to just work on an area, and then if it's not going like you want it to go, just leave it alone. Go, do something else, take a walk, have a drink, whatever, and then come back later with another layer. Hope that it goes better next time. Better luck next time. Good for that layer. I think she needs some eyebrows. I tend to save eyes and eyebrows as kind of the last step, and things just look weird until the eyebrows go in. Like progressively weirder and weirder, and then you put the eyebrows in and you're like, oh wow, it's a person. Who knew? I start off with a shape for the eyebrows. Generally, she has very light eyebrows. A gradient shape, like just about everything else I'm doing. And then I'll go over that later with a darker layer and paint in very fine hairs. But that means I'm not trying to do too much in just one layer. This layer is just to create the shape, not the detail. Does anyone know if Bella Ramsey actually has a mark on her eyebrow, or if this was part of the character design? Pulling out progressively smaller and smaller brushes as the night progresses, until I have teeny itty bitty brushes, and I'm putting little itty bitty spots of color in places. Way less exciting than using the big brushes. She needs a little bit more contouring in her face. This whole kind of front part of her face is a little bit flat because I haven't given it shape. And again, putting down a very light layer of color and then blotting the edge so that it's not hard line. And in some areas I'll go in with a brush instead of the blotter because I have a little bit more control that way. And then sometimes you just have to poke it. I'm doing something I explicitly said that you shouldn't do, which is to kind of fuss with an area that's still wet, and the only reason I'm doing that is because I'm putting very concentrated pigment in rather than more water, and the area is still wet enough to take it. Also, I make bad decisions, you know. Next up, because I'm not doing any more big washes on her nose, and this is all dried, I'm going to take off the frisket just here so that I can start refining these shapes a little bit. As you see, the frisket, when it comes off, the edges aren't super clean, so I always want to take that off first, and then I can clean up the edges a little bit, rather than try to get the shape of the frisket just right, because the frisket is really hard to control. I'll also probably go over some of this white. I want it to be kind of an off-white rather than actually white. Most of the shadowing and the contouring that I'm doing on her face has been warm so far, but she also has some cool shadows as well. So I'm going to pull in a little bit of this blue that I was working with earlier. And start to brush that in. And then again, make the shape. Brush the edges. Herd the cats. A little more detail in the eyes now. Much like teeth, eyes are also never actually white. Thank you for coming, Miranda. Yes, definitely. East Coast time. Go to bed. Thanks for showing up. I'll post the resulting picture on Instagram probably tomorrow. Or whenever it's completely done. I don't anticipate that it's going to be like 100% done by the end of the night. I may end up going past 2 hours, just because why not? But I'll be sure to post the resulting painting so you can see. Thanks for coming. Even here, around her eye, where it's very, very fine detail, I'm still trying to make a shape. It's a little bit fat here at the edge, and thin, or fat in the middle and thin at the edges, rather than a line. I've made this area here of kind of a warm brown, and then I'm going to pick the darkest part of the area and I'm going to blop some of this deep Payne's gray in here. And the resulting gradient should give some depth to her eye, because it is light at the bottom, kind of a very light reddish shade at the bottom. Wrong brush. And quite dark at the top. Same deal with the other eye. Starting off with a reddish-brown base. It's kind of tough to paint an eye that's this far in profile, because all of the details that we're used to looking at and thinking, oh, that's shaped like an eye, or this is how you draw an eye, kind of start to break down at this angle. And so what I'm drawing is like kind of a fat rectangle, but it's an eye, I swear. Okay, I'm looking at about 40 minutes to go. Don't think I'll get to the clothing. Might do the hair. I'm really hoping mostly to get the face into recognizable state. The first step, well, like the 10th step of painting a watercolor portrait is I get all my base colors down, and I get all the contouring down, and then I have to spend 3 hours fussing at little details and tweaking things until it looks like a likeness, because painting a face is one thing, but if you want it to look like someone in particular, often there's a whole lot of teeny little bitty details, like the angle in someone's eyes and how one eyelid is a little bit droopy and the other one's different, stuff like that. The angle of the lips that tells you a whole lot about the expression and the self of the subject, and those details tends to come from lots of little itty bitty fussy stuff, as opposed to big decisive movements. I would like to be one of those people who can paint portraits quickly with big decisive movements, but right now I'm just a fussy little guy. That's me, hashtag fussy little guy, Olive. And I'm sort of skipping ahead here. Sometimes, I usually try to... Oh, that was too much nostril. I usually try to start over. To kind of keep everything in about the same stage and finish things at the same time, so that means that my portrait doesn't have eyebrows until the very end. But it is really helpful also to sometimes see, once you add that final layer, I'm building up layers and layers of progressively less subtle gradient and often more concentrated pigment, and finally once I get that last layer of the darkest pigment on top, the darkest layer, that tends to be when it starts to look recognizable, when it starts to look like a person, and that's a very rewarding moment. And really, right now, I'm not supposed to be doing this level of fussy detail work if I want to be finishing this portrait, but so it is. Okay, moving on to the bottom lip, and then I think I'm gonna try to get some of the hair down. She has a very intense color just on the inside of her lip and along the edge. And then it's really quite pale all along the rest of the bottom lip. When I pick out colors, rather than trying to match exactly what color is on the screen, I'm usually trying to look at it relative to all of the other colors. Which means the area right on the inside of her lip is some of the very brightest red that we see in the portrait. And so I want to make sure that the brightest red I'm using is going there. It doesn't have to be exactly the same shade as what's on the subject in the photo, but making sure that that is going towards the brightest red, and I'll have to do that with a couple of different layers, I think, is going to be what helps to bring everything together. Okay. Let me leave that alone for now. Let's take a look at her hair. And I try to do hair with big, decisive movements, because nobody really cares if the individual hair strands are exactly the same. People really, really care, and they really notice if something about the eye is off or if something about the lips are off, but nobody looks at the hair and says that one strand is out of place. So easier to let those big, kind of chaotic, loose watercolor effects go to work for me on the hair rather than try to be too precise about it. I will be a little bit more precise in the hair that falls over her face, just to get the general shape of it, but I'm still going to try to keep everything more or less pretty soft. So, as such, we're going back to more or less what I did for stage 1, which is get everything wet and then put some pigment in it. And then try not to care too much about it. It's just really the hardest part. As I do this, I'm trying to be conscious of any lighter areas. And I do see that there's some spots where her scalp shows through, and I'm not going to try to be too picky about those, because that's going to be hard to keep clear. And I can lift some pigment at the end to get the same effect, or at least something similar. So we're going to put down a very warm, deep brown for this whole area. And then I'm going to drop in some darker, cooler blue-gray to really bring the depth in. So let me get some more of this. This is quinacridone rust for anyone who cares about the specific pigments. Brady, thank you for joining in. It was good to have you here. I'm happy to talk about puddle control. Thank you, Mr. Moo. I appreciate that. I'm going to try to keep the top part lighter because there is this general gradient. If you cross your eyes and you look at the picture, it's kind of lighter and cooler, a little bit more yellow up towards the top of her hairline, and then it really deepens down as you go. Much deeper than what this pigment alone is going to give me. The area at the back of her neck where her ponytail is our deepest shade. That's what is closest to black in this picture. Because I want the hair to kind of blend in with her jacket, I'm going to do the jacket at the same time. Because I don't care if these colors blend into each other. In fact, I want them to. I generally like to try and get the darkest areas down before I finish the face, because what happens is when I add this big pile of dark pigment here, it's going to start to blow out the more subtle shades in the painting. And so if I don't add my like dark background stuff until the very end, then sometimes what can happen is I can find out kind of too late that I didn't paint everything else intensely enough, because everything in painting is really, it's very relative. It's very relative. It is also, I suppose, quite relevant, but depends to what. If I have here's a good example. The darkest shade on this piece is actually not that dark. It's kind of like a middling deep gray, but because it's the darkest shade in the piece, it's like the black value. So everything else is relative to it, as it is to the white. So if I add very, very dark color someplace, my other areas will start to look more washed out. Sometimes this is good because what you really want is for like the face to be a little bit less intense. Maybe you feel like it was too red before or something. So it can be really useful to, you can adjust your colors based on, by introducing other colors. Like, you don't even have to change the color that you think is wrong. You can just put another color next to it that has something to say, and then all of a sudden everything looks different. Definitely witchcraft. Okay. I'm gonna let this settle. Work a little bit more. Into the shirt here. Okay, I gotta leave this alone, so that means I need to pick another spot to fuss with. Ooh, wait, I found something else I could fuss with. Let's do this. Something I like to do for hair is rather than using a brush, just to put a little bit of pigment on the end of the brush. Create the look of kind of messy, sort of slightly frazzled hair without making a big line about it. Actually need that line to go away. Okay. Alright, find something else to fuss with. Let's go back to the lips. I missed some chat stuff. Yes, Bryant is correct about that. There is some light. There we go. I'll just show you guys what it looks like without that. Now you can't see anything. How you like that? So a lot of that's reflection. Okie dokie. Back to the lips. What is that? I think it's time to put some of the hair in the face down. So, I'm not entirely sure how this is gonna go. What I want to do is leave it sort of loose and a little scrubby looking. I don't want to be too prescriptivist about where exactly the lines are. And usually the way to do that is with using kind of like sort of a scrubby brush. But this is a technique that I have never managed to perfect. So we're just gonna experiment together and see what happens. I'm creating a line, and then I am, hopefully before it dries, I don't think I quite caught this one in time, putting a little bit of pigment down just to let that meld together so it doesn't look too precise. We lost our tunes. There we go. I'm using 2 different sized brushes because something about there's going to be, having a little bit of irregularity in here is going to be what keeps it looking kind of messy as opposed to like sleek tendrils. And so having some thinner lines, well, either it's going to make it look like a hot mess or it's going to make it look like the right kind of mess. We'll see. I think that was a little bit hot mess right there. This is from Last of Us, Bryant. I should be asking what HBO or whatever for they should endorse me or whatever, or I should give me money for advertising Last of Us. It is a very good show though. I loved it. I haven't played the game, but I heard the game is also really good too. call that something for the hair. I'm gonna let it sit, see how it evolves. Work on the, let's say, oh, where did I put my brush? It's gone forever. Shit. Bad news. Here we go. I'm gonna work on the shoulder on the other side now. It's the same color as the other side of the jacket. The jacket is the same color and the eye sees that, but it's illuminated with different light, so the actual color value is gonna be different. And my job is to find a way to represent a red jacket so that it looks recognizably like the other half of the red jacket, but also looks like it's being illuminated by different lighting. Wish me luck. And rather than thinking about all the specific folds and getting too caught up in exactly what this jacket looks like, I'm going to try to let watercolor do all the work. That's the theme of the night. And just drop in some strategically placed pigments. Hope for the best. Let's walk that back. More or less the way that this works, where you can leave out some details but you have to paint others, is that the eye and the brain have determined that some things are relevant and other things are not relevant. So your jacket can look really nothing like a jacket. It's just kind of the right color in approximately the right area, and your brain will just fill that in because it does not care about the folds in the jacket. It says, oh, that's a jacket. Great, I'll fill that in for you. So, you know, it doesn't need to look like a jacket, really. Just the suggestion of a jacket. And the brain does all the hard work. The brain of the viewer. But you can't do the same thing with certain details. But if you can nail the certain details, like if you can get the eyes just the right way, or you can make sure that the mouth has the right tilt so that the expression is captured, then you can get away with having very few, like, truly specific details in, and leave everything else as a suggestion, and the viewer's brain will just kind of figure it out. Right now I'm picking up a little bit of that pigment that's still wet from the hairline. Because that's one of those details, like a critical detail, that makes it look like she's kind of sort of sweaty and a little raggedy as opposed to crisply put together. And I don't need to do too much to give that sense. In fact, if I do too much, it won't give that sense, which is the maddening thing. I found that either you have to be photorealistic and you have to get everything in just the right place, or you have to get the critical details correct, and then you can leave everything else as a suggestion. But the magic that goes into making that work or not work is kind of complicated, and I don't think I fully understand it yet. Olive, thank you so much for showing up. I really appreciate the support. Have a good sleep. I'm gonna leave the hair alone for a little while. I'm gonna fill in a little bit more of the shirt. In part because as I work out the color scheme of the shirt and the rest of this painting, it's gonna help me make decisions about what to do with the rest of the face and how to adjust the face so that it looks correct. And, you know, if it'll tell me if I need to make something darker or lighter. The only thing is I still have a big puddle over here, and I really don't want to run into that. So, let's see, where can I work? Yeah, we'll figure it out. I want to put in some of the dark burgundy and this softball tee that she's wearing. As this area of color starts to overlap the one right next to it, you'll notice that there's these like darker areas where it kind of, the two colors meet. And that's something I usually try to avoid. That's why I did the hair and the shoulder kind of at the same time. In this case, I'll be able to, once it dries, I'll be able to pick up some of that pigment. I also don't mind so much because there is kind of a hard line there, and I don't mind it being there. Just to explain some of what's going on. A little bit too close to the sun right here. I had that wet working area and it started to leak out a little bit, and the best thing I can do right now is just ignore it. Leave it alone. I don't really need to be too precise about this. Her shirt's kind of raggedy, and so I don't want to make necessarily smooth, perfect lines here. I kind of want to leave a little bit of gestural patterns. Oops, I don't think I was supposed to put that there. So usually when you get your pigment like this on an area that is not supposed to have pigment, you're kind of screwed. You either have to like poke at it and keep brushing it away from that area until it's dry, or you can do this trick that I discovered that probably somebody else already knew about, which is I take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. This is like 70%, I think. I dip my brush in it, and then I paint just along the line where I don't want the pigment and I don't want the water to be. And what this does is, if anyone's familiar with the effects of isopropyl alcohol on water, is it evaporates the water there. And it dries out that little area. Which is why when you spray alcohol onto your wet paper, things get weird. It's one of those weird effects. But anyway, I use it as like a little spot treatment when I want to move pigment that I have accidentally got in the wrong area. I'm still kind of perfecting that technique, so we'll see how that works. And I wouldn't say that was a critical detail, except something about that piece of white, I think, says a lot. It has a lot of information about the way that the shirt folds, and I think that's valuable to the texture of the shirt, of the general feeling of it. And so it's not a critical detail like a, getting an eyebrow right would be, but I cared about it. And ultimately, painting is really a whole lot about making decisions about which details you care about and which ones you don't care about, and then you let other people see what decisions that you made. And then they can be like, yeah, I agree with you, or no, your art sucks and I hate you. And I'm pulling some of the same pigment here down in to create some of the shadowing of the shirt. I'm not sure I'm going to want to leave that white, but I'm also not sure I want to go to the trouble of painting it, so we're just going to do this for now and see what happens. I'm gonna do that same thing over here where I had this boo-boo to try to stop. You can see how that kind of pushes the pigment back. I'm not sure if you all could see that. Maybe I'll be able to do a demonstration or something specific to this later. Oops, actually I got another area where there's some bad boy pigment getting in the wrong spot. I've been spattering stuff all over this all day. I think to finish this painting, I'm probably actually just gonna bring my line up here. I'm gonna do that now. Because I don't want to make up the rest of the shirt. I don't know exactly what it looks like, and I don't really feel like making up a whole bunch of possibly unconvincing shirt folds. So I'm actually gonna bring up the painting to right here, and then I'll cut it later. Is that straight? Okay. Noted, Laramie. Okay, what next? Okay. This actually has gone a little bit further than I thought it would get. So, that's great. Which is also good because we're about to hit hour 2. I'm gonna keep going for a little bit longer. I think there's a couple more, like, good wins that, like, you know, will be satisfying changes, but I'm probably gonna close up in the next I don't know, half hour or something? I never know. If you need to leave, of course, anyone can go. I will not call the cops on you, but thank you so much for dropping by. Okay. I'm gonna pull the frisket off of the eyes so I can clean these up. Really important detail about pulling frisket off is it's gotta be dry. If you pull frisket off a wet area, you're just, like I'm doing right now actually, you just end up smearing the paint around and it gets bad. Okay, where else? We got a little bit in here? No? Oh. And now that I'm having some of these, I'm revealing some of the whites. This has actually a really similar effect to adding dark blacks, or like deep colors. I don't use black, so adding my darkest values once I reveal the white and have my lightest values show up, it often adds a whole lot of contrast, and it can correct for things, and make an area that like looked too subtle, now it looks more striking. So it kind of has the opposite effect as adding in the deeps. Okay, let's do. What I'm gonna do? I'm gonna put her ear in. I'm gonna make some adjustments to the hair on the side of her face because I feel like it's a little bit too crisp. Probably gonna color balance her neck because there's not enough shadow there. And then I'm probably gonna call it a night. Unless we have any requests. If you have questions, just general watercolor questions or whatever, feel free to toss them my way. I'll try to, now that there's not quite so much time crunch because I decided to ignore it, I'll try to answer them. Honestly, Laramie, I'm impressed you're still up. It's like, oh, I guess it's midnight or something over there. Gideon, the frisket is not brisket, not to be confused with brisket, but it's a little rubber, it's a bad smelling rubber, liquid rubber that I paint onto the paper before I put any pigment on it. And it dries and it protects the paper underneath it so that it stays white. So it means I can peel it off later. I don't have to worry about like not painting over certain areas. I can just use my big brush and make big decisive movements. And then later I can pull that frisket off and I'll have those little pieces of white that have been preserved. Because unless you use ink or use gouache or something that's opaque, you can't paint white in watercolor. You just have to have not painted it. Completely understandable, Bryant, to be suspicious about those colors. I shocked myself when I started learning this style of watercolor painting because I think the first time I did it by accident. I was like, I'm just gonna paint this really green portrait. It's gonna be funny because it's so green. And then when I finally got all the layers down, I was like, holy shit, that just looks like skin. So yeah, there's something about all the colors kind of balancing out eventually, and it creates really cool depth and realism, in my opinion. Yeah, dude, I want to do a whole, like, seminar on, like, what even is skin and tone and how does it work. It's such a weird material. Like, as I was saying earlier, it has both reflective and translucent properties. And so there's not a lot of other things that are true this way, like certain types of opaque, like partially opaque and translucent glass, like wax. There's a couple other materials that have this similar properties of both reflecting light and translucing light through it, but skin is really kind of unique in some ways, and so painting it is much more complex than just putting a color down. Like, you point at someone's skin and you're like, what color is that? And you're like, I don't know, it's kind of like an orangey, like, peach, or like maybe kind of sort of a walnut color, or like, you know, there's lots of different ways to describe skin tone from the surface, but if you're trying to replicate it, usually you have to use like an entire rainbow of colors. What I'm trying to do right now is get red into the ear without it going all over the place. Ears are generally really, really pink. Well, ears on light-skinned people tend to be really pink. I'm gonna leave that for now. It's gonna need a couple more layers before it stops looking weird, but it's true for all of us. Oh, I see what's happening. Can you still hear my audio? Or is it just the video that's frozen? Okay, so I can pretend this is just like a really advanced painting technique then. Let me restart my camera. Okay, give me a second. I'm gonna go to BRB. Oops, no, we go here. Okay. My camera has identified that it's past my deadline. Oh, that's so weird. Why are you doing this? I may have to stop and restart the screen. I'm not actually sure what to do here. Ooh, operation is timed out. I love that. Let's try. not gotten better. Okay, I have to restart my camera, but the thing is that every time I restart this, I have to start the streaming software all over again, so I may end up having to end the stream and then restart it. Oh, man, you're having a bad time. Here we go. Okay, let's see if I can get this. Ooh. Okay. Unfortunately, I think I'm gonna have to stop the stream, and then I'll just pick it up again. I think you'll have to just hang out on my page and reconnect to it. Sorry about this. I have to restart my OBS software if I want this to connect. So, hopefully I'll figure out how to figure this out in the future. But in any case, see you guys in a minute.